We've had a lot of playoff talk, ranking scrutiny, and forecasting of what this might look like with an expanded playoff. But while fans are caught up in scenarios and debate, I found a guy who has not forgotten about the magic of Saturdays. Here he is. Josh Pate is here to set the record. Pate, playoff expansion, why do you hate it?
I don't necessarily hate the concept of an expanded playoff. I hate the number 12. And so you have a couple of hours, right? So I think about years past, and I start with what my standard is for what should warrant consideration into the college football postseason, which for me is excellence. That's the bar that I want a team to meet. And I don't go back anywhere in time and find more than 4 teams that I think meet that criteria. But I know what the counter is. The counter is, don't we want to make November more exciting? Don't we want to at the very least, create the illusion that teams are playing for something? Which is really where my biggest beef comes from. Because there was a time, and I know this is trying to put toothpaste back in tube and we can't do it, but let's try anyway. There was a time, not that long ago, 10, 15 years ago, pre-playoff era, where it meant something if someone predicted you to win 6 games and you're trailing 8 or 9 in the trajectory column. It meant something. It meant something that I may go play in the Capital One Bowl. There were no phrases like meaningless November game. There were no phrases like meaningless bowl game. There were no phrases like opt-out. None of that happened until we came upon the playoff era, and somewhere along the lines, someone with a vested interest in said playoff convinced people everything has to be framed with the backdrop in October and November of whether it matters in relation to the playoff. I don't like that because I don't think it's the spirit of college football. So when everyone dives into how great the playoff would be at the micro level, I just zoom out in the macro level. And then, Emily, people are surprised I know what those two things mean. So it's an entire separate conversation.
Okay. Wow, we have a whole segment to go and started off strong there. Let's switch gears and talk about a team that you have ranked 3rd in your JP poll right now. That's Michigan. The Wolverines just chugging along, outscoring opponents by an FBS best 30.1 points per game. We'll Pate and see how they fare against Ohio State right now, but how do you assess this team?
I think they are every bit as good as they were last year. A little bit different style of team. They don't have edge rushers screaming off the corner at quarterbacks and whatnot, but I think in the aggregate, if you look at how good their offensive identity is, it's exactly what Jim Harbaugh wants. And what's funny, if we go back a little ways and you go back to, let's say, Preview Magazine season, a lot of those publications, and maybe even common sense in a fan's mind, would have indicated, okay, you're losing Ajabo, you're losing Aiden Hutchinson. Oh, by the way, both coordinators are gone. Historically, those data points indicate to us there's going to be a drop-off, especially if we're talking about a team that just achieved something they hadn't achieved under the current regime, i.e. a Big Ten championship, i.e. a playoff trip. And yet, all Jim Harbaugh did was say, no, we'll be fine. And he immediately had his promotion from within strategy ready, especially at offensive coordinator. Not only does it turn out they're every bit as good, if not better, production-wise this year, but also you look at the guy who left, and that's Josh Gaddis, and they've had all kinds of problems, albeit in year 1 in Miami. It's impressive to me that they stayed the course, they believed in their identity, and now you look at them, and we have this big date looming, Ohio State hosting Michigan, and we remember what happened in that game last year, and you got to ask yourself, is home field really going to matter that much? Is home field going to be something that can derail Michigan? We've seen it happen. Tennessee hosting Bama. We saw it happen last week. Georgia hosting Tennessee. I don't think Michigan plays the style of ball that makes them prone to being derailed. I just flat out think you got to beat them.
Okay. See what happens in a couple weeks there. For a guy who loves the regular season as much as you do, you must be loving the Big 12 right now. What makes this conference the most heart-Pate-inducing week in and week out?
I think if you look up and down that list right there, you've got TCU. Max Duggan's played good ball this year. Quinn Ewers at Texas has the ability to do that. Blake Shapen is not necessarily the identity. The passing game's not the identity of Baylor, but when you start going up and down the list, Spencer Sanders, you had Daniels before he got injured at Kansas. We've gotten 2 quarterbacks that have played very well for Kansas State, but there is no Bryce Young at his peak. There is no CJ Stroud at his peak. So you don't have truly elite first-round caliber NFL quarterback play here. Therefore, there's not a team that has separated itself. TCU right now is sitting as the only undefeated squad in the conference, and yet how many weeks in a row have we seen them trail at halftime? So they've had to storm back in the second half. It's just been competitively balanced, and what really has bothered me a little bit if we circle back to the playoff conversation for a second, is I heard someone the other day who shall remain nameless because they don't work here, talk about TCU's resume. And they talked about how it was impressive a few weeks ago, but now not so much. And why? The reason why, at least the reason I heard them say is, well, the teams that they beat have lost more games since then, so their resume doesn't look as strong. And my counter to that is, if you play a round-robin conference schedule, and for those unfamiliar, everybody in the Big 12 plays everybody. And if you've got a really, really tightly packed, competitively balanced conference, how do you avoid those teams losing more games? It's mathematical certainty. Someone has to lose every week. So I think, like, if we were to put a can of unnamed soda, because they don't sponsor the show right here, and I pop the top on it and I chug 5 sips, my throat would be burning, right? And then I leave the can there, and you wait 3 days. And then you come and take another 5 sips after you wash the top off, of course, and your throat doesn't burn. Do I look at myself and say, wow, you're kind of soft? It turns out that didn't burn your throat after all. Or do I say, that's just a flatter version of the product now than it was when I drank it? The point is, you having an easier time with that soda, doesn't mean that I struggled any less with it. It's just when you catch a team, when do you play someone? Did they lose a quarterback between the time I played them and the time you played them? So that entire conversation gets me aggravated. But the Big 12 competitive balance, if you've wanted it this year, that's been the conference to go to.
Okay. That's going to be tough to switch gears from that.
You had to be ready for it.
What a metaphor. I appreciate that. All right, your Every Given Saturday tour stops in New Orleans this weekend for a G5 battle between 17th ranked Tulane and number 22 UCF. Now, your tour destinations are reserved for what you call the best game of the weekend. So I'm going to be patent to the point here. Why is it this one?
Well, first off, the AAC may very well be on the line here. Cincinnati's still involved in that conversation, but I mean, you're looking at a Tulane team there. We were just talking about the Big 12. One of Kansas State's only losses was at home against Tulane. And meanwhile, we've got Gus Malzahn, who may have made the most shrewd tactical move ever, even though part of it wasn't his choice, getting fired at Auburn. He's now landed in a perfect position. Not only does he get to live in Florida this time of year, let's leave that on its own, but then also he gets to coach a really good team here. They were already stockpiled with talent. He's eventually, as it turns out, going to move to the Big 12 very soon, so he's right back at the Power 5 level. But in the meantime, the landscape is shifting around us to where even if he wasn't going to the Big 12, you've got virtual certainty, virtually a guaranteed playoff spot if you just win this conference from now on. So far less pressure, too, I would imagine, in that Central Florida job than Auburn. These are two really good teams, and there's a lot of competitive balance in this league this year, too. There is no runaway. Most years, we're looking at the playoff picture this time of year and saying, what are we going to do with the undefeated G5? What are we going to do with the undefeated AAC? And that's Cincinnati last year. We don't have that this year. And so it may very well be that we're not looking at a G5 team in the playoff. That's a certainty, I think, at this point. But we're still looking at a really competitive race. And for people who celebrate the Every Given Saturday philosophy, that is to be celebrated. Should be a really good game. I think it opened at a pick and lines moved a couple of points in favor of UCF, but it should be a 4-quarter game down there.
G5 Josh.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you joining us, keeping us on the Pate and Narrow as always. Our new episodes of Late Kick with Josh Pate every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday at 8 Eastern on the Late Kick YouTube page.